There's something about the Gipper that all these years later, we still yearn for those days. In retrospect, 1980 was one of the most important elections of modern times. And finally now, not only is NewsNation helping to give Reagan his due, there is a new feature film featuring Ronald Reagan.
I am about to start the biggest war of this century, and I'm not going to fire a single shot.
You're going to blow up 8 years of diplomacy.
Well, if you think that got their undies, then what? You just wait.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
What would you have me do?
I want you to fight!
Reagan will be out this summer in theaters. With us now, Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas and presidential candidate. Governor, as I watch everyone lionize Ronald Reagan, and I am an unabashed Ronald Reagan fan, it occurs to me that Ronald Reagan and his policies would be completely out of step with the Republican Party of today. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that. I think he was very much in step with a lot of the policies. He believed in cutting taxes. He believed in a strong national defense. He did not believe in engaging America and its troops into a war. He felt that the best way to keep us out of war was to have a military nobody wanted to try to confront. He was pro-life. So are the Republicans today. He was the first real Republican at the national level who was pro-life. Republicans historically had not been. So there were so many things that Ronald Reagan kind of, I would say, fronted for the Republican Party that we are today. But most of all, he was the happy warrior. He was the person who had a phenomenal sense of humor. He was also the person, though, that the press didn't always like. And I think it's interesting that there were people, particularly world leaders, that were scared to death of Reagan. They thought he was just a crazy cowboy, that he couldn't wait to push that red button in his office somewhere and start blowing up the world. The truth is, really, he's the president that, until Donald Trump, was the only one that didn't get us involved in a shooting war. And it was because he didn't have to. He was able to give people that sense that they didn't want to mess with him. And that was one of the reasons he was a great president.
One of many reasons, and I think you said he was a happy warrior. He talked often about the greatness of America and inspired America. There was mourning in America. He was the one who came up with Make America Great Again. He talked about, among other things, the shining city of the hill. But I want to play back-to-back with you. Ronald Reagan talking about Mikhail Gorbachev, that famous moment at the Brandenburg Gate, and then how Donald Trump talks about world leaders. Take a listen.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
When you see President Xi of China, when you see Kim Jong-un of North Korea, when you see Putin, and you see all of these people, they're at the top of their game, whether you like it or not, and they can't believe that this has happened to the United States. We have lost respect all over the world.
Do we really see Donald Trump saying, Mr. Putin, get out of Ukraine, and anybody taking him seriously?
Well, I know that he was sitting at dinner at Mar-a-Lago with President Xi. He said, excuse me. He got up. He came back in about 5 minutes. He said, we just put a bunch of missiles down in the airfield in Syria. I think that that was one of those moments. Excuse me, my chair is falling apart here. I think that was one of those great moments where really Donald Trump revealed the kind of person that he just says what he thinks. But he also is an actor of doing things. You know, in many ways, 1980 is very similar to today. There is a sense of malaise, if you will, about what's going on in the country today. If you listen to Joe Biden's speech at Morehouse, it was all about how terrible things are and how dire and dark things are. Donald Trump's message last night in the Bronx was really Reagan-esque. It was, I think, his best speech. He didn't go into a lot of grievances, but he talked about what a great country America is, whether you're black or brown or whoever you are, that it's a great country with great opportunity, and that the government needs to really just get out of the way and let people prosper.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider.
And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.